All right, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone who has joined us from different locations. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Tanmay, and I'm part of the Kony developer community team. Today, we'll be talking about how you can ensure a seamless, consistent, and enjoyable UX for your end user when building the solution. Our digital experience architect, Rosh, today will share her expertise, expert views, and UI expertise. So before we start the session, let me share a few things. If you have any questions during the webinar, make sure to use the Q&A panel, post your questions there, and we'll try to answer them as soon as possible. We are also recording this webinar, and it will be posted on Basecamp as a resource, so you can watch the recording later also, and you can share with your friends, peers, and your colleagues in your office. We also have a couple of polls during the event, so make sure you participate, make it more fun. So let's start the presentation. Over to you, Rosh, and I'm going to stop sharing and you can share your screen. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Just going to try and figure out how to share my screen.
Yep, sure.
That you can see my screen. Is it visible?
Not yet. Yeah, something is coming up. Okay, yeah, we can see your screen now.
Now?
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, cool. So, hi, my name is Roj Serchi, and I'm going to talk to you about the importance of UX at Temenos. So just a disclaimer before I start, this presentation is, it's actually applicable to all roles, be it, a project manager, developer, tester, and so on. It's not just for the UX designers. In fact, I reckon the non-UXers will actually get more out of this presentation than the designers, but let's see. So first of all, I just want to introduce myself. So as you know, my name is Roj, said it before. I'm a UX specialist in the sales team, currently based in the not rainy at all city of Amsterdam, with a bunch of other sales guys doing work for EMEA. My background is in consultancy. I've worked for a big consultancy called Accenture, you might know it, for a number of years, based in London. And whilst I was working at Accenture, I worked for a various number of different industries. Industries like telecommunications, retail, energy, insurance, and so on. So banking only got introduced later, once I joined Backbase, and then Kony, and of course now Temenos. I've basically gone through the whole industry. But throughout my consulting period, I played many different roles, such as project manager, front-ender, even mobile app development, but of course, mainly UX. So I have a good idea of the different roles and the different responsibilities that are expected in an Agile team. However, now I'm solely focused on the UX side of things, hence why I'm giving you this presentation now. So a few fun facts about myself. I love to travel. In fact, I just got back from a long trip to Madagascar. I was there for 3 weeks. It was stunning. So if you fancy playing with lemurs or hiking up amazing mountains and seeing really nice beaches, then I definitely recommend it. I also made a short film a few years ago, back in 2017. It's only 10 minutes long, but filmmaking is something that I've always enjoyed doing on the side. So if you're interested, feel free to Google me and check it out. Okay. So let's have a look at what I have in store for you today. I'm going to first cover the basics and tell you what UX is. Then we'll go through some common misconceptions about UX and UI. And then we'll go through why it's so important in the implementation of the product, but also in the workplace. Then I'll show you what a typical UX process would look like for a designer. and how agile and design thinking would tie into it. Last of all, I think it's important to go through how you can actually utilize the methodology that I discuss with our visualizer tool. Okay, so first of all, let's start with the basics and discuss what UX really is. So this is actually something that's misunderstood the majority of the time, and it's sometimes misjudged on its importance in a product development lifecycle, but also on a high level as well. I'll explain this in detail throughout my slide deck, but let's begin with a simple definition. So UX, it stands for user experience. User experience design is the process of enhancing customer satisfaction and loyalty by improving the usability, ease of use, and pleasure provided in the interaction between the customer and the product. So essentially, it's just about providing meaningful and relevant experiences for the users. So it involves the design of the entire process of acquiring and integrating a product, including things like branding, design, usability, and function. It covers all of those. Okay, but let's talk about UX and UI. A really, really common mistake, and I'm sure this has crossed your mind at some point, is what is UX and what is UI? Are they the same thing? So first of all, no, they are not the same thing. They are indeed different, completely different concepts. So UX, as we've discussed, stands for user experience, and UI stands for user interface design. They're both design principles, and they're related to one another. However, they are very different in their nature. UX design is a little bit more analytical. So in other words, it's a process of defining users' problems and then solving them before hopefully the user realizes. UI design, it's more visual and closely related to something like graphic design. It involves things like color codes, buttons, forms, fonts, visual hierarchy, and many more. So it's basically responsible for the visual product perception. Although the two of them are very similar in many ways, they're also very different. So a UX designer and a UI designer, you'll probably find them usually working together on the same team, or you'll have the same person having to wear both hats, which is kind of what I'm doing at the moment, actually. But they do use different tools, different skills, and they approach the problem in different ways. So as you can see from the diagram here, UX and UI are not completely separate, like the top left-hand corner. They're not just touching, and they're not even intersecting. But more ideally, they're like the diagram on the right-hand corner. So UX would be the overarching process, let's say, and UI design would be a part of that. Okay, now let's get on to the fun part, which is the misconceptions about UX. I'm sure many of you have maybe assumed a few of these at some point in your career. So as you can see on my slide, I've got a bunch of them here. I've got design should be pretty. I've seen this many, many times before in projects. And also UI equals UX. We've just discussed this. You are like your user. Yeah, designers like to think that sometimes that's what they build out will work for them and will then work for their user as well. More options equal higher satisfaction. Also seen this plenty of times where the project manager or the product owner will think that by pushing more features in, it will lead to a better product and a more satisfied user. and also users make optimal choices. So let's go through these one by one. First one is design should be pretty. So many people will see design as creating something that should be aesthetically pleasing, and that the more visually attractive it is, the better the design. This couldn't be further from the truth. The aim of great design is actually to solve problems. It's not just about the colors and fonts, it's more about prototyping, research, doing testing, and even science as well. So when you're implementing a new design for your product, just ensure that you utilize a UX designer or a researcher to put together a valuable structure to your product based on research and testing results before you actually hand it off to a designer to come up with something that just looks better. So yeah, as you can see from the GIF on my slide, you need to make sure that it's beautiful on the inside as well as the outside. UI and UX, we spoke about this briefly before already, and we've distinguished the difference between the two. But just to give you an idea with a bunch of GIFs, because it's fun, why not? The left GIF would show you how UI would look like without UX. So you've got a painter that's carelessly throwing paint all over a canvas with no structure or meaning. Then you've got the right GIF, which shows us the opposite, UX without UI. You get the context, but there's no content. So, you know, on the GIF, we see a floating dog in space with no idea why they've been put there. Okay, next one is you are like your user. It's really, really easy to assume that whatever works for you should work for all other users, as you may see yourself as the average user. However, this is not a good way of thinking, and it leads to bad design. It's the equivalent to saying that humans all see things the same way. They have the same logic, functionality, and emotions. But you need to really bear in mind that everyone is unique in their needs and motivations. And you need to take it into account. And you do this by conducting the right user research on your users. If you don't, it will only lead to more frustration, as you'll notice the user making decisions and choices that you would have never made yourself. Like Homer Simpson on the GIF. He's just getting frustrated with himself. More options equals higher satisfaction. I'm sure all of us have seen this plenty of times before. So the misconception is that adding more options for the user will satisfy them more. It might seem that giving them more flexibility and functionality with your solution will help, but it can lead to something called decision paralysis for the user, which basically means they're unable to make a decision. This, of course, it leads to frustration, and then leads to their refusal to use your product. And if you know Hick's law, it says that the time that it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. Thus, designers should really provide an optimal quantity of choices in order to maximize the outcome. Users make optimal choices. We've got this little boy crossing his fingers, hoping that the user will make the optimal choice. It's a common mistake to assume that the user will, in fact, make the optimal choice when using your product. For example, let's say they decide to click on the confirm button that you've placed on the bottom instead of a button that looks like a primary button just above it. So studies have actually shown that it's not the case that users will make optimal choices, and that they actually tend to choose an option that catches their eye instead, which of course may not necessarily be the one that you want them to pick. So you need to bear this in mind when doing your design. I just wanted to give you an example of assuming your user will make optimal choices. So I'm just going to read this out. A QA engineer walks into a bar. They order 1 beer, orders -0 beers, orders 2.5 billion beers, orders -15, orders blah, 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 Lizard 999 beers. The first real customer walks into a bar and asks where the bathroom is. The bar bursts in flames and everyone is dead. So basically, your user didn't do any of the things that the QA engineer expected him or her to do, but instead they asked where the bathroom is, which the product has not accounted for, thus, I guess, making it burst into flames, or in reality, crash the product. So to conclude, you need to try and make your options as clear as possible and provide possible outcomes of what to expect. Okay, so those were all the misconceptions of UX. It's now time to understand why UX is so important in the first place. Now, there's many reasons, but I'll walk you through this diagram so that we can shortlist a few important points. First of all, the process begins with the user having a need for something or a problem that needs solving. Let's say, for example, the user needs to make a transfer from their bank account to another account. If indeed you've added that feature into your application as a result of, let's say, user research and testing, then the user will come across the transfer feature and this will successfully fulfill their need. Once they're fulfilled, of course, they'll be happy with your service. And a happy customer will more likely be more inclined to leave you a good review and or promote your products and services to others in their circle. And in turn, you will gain more customers. And of course, the more customers generally means a higher return on investment. So as you can see, many reasons why UX is important. Another good reason to invest in good UX and UI design is so that you're on par with your competitors. And if not them, then the big tech giants out there, such as Google, Facebook, and YouTube. These players have actually realized the significance of UX, and so much so that they've fully invested in transforming their culture internally to be entirely customer-centric, thus enforcing better output from all teams to produce meaningful features for their customers. So, whenever you design a screen or a flow or a journey for your product, just think about whether it matches the level of quality that your competitors put in. This is not to say at all that you should copy what they're doing. Actually, you shouldn't do that because your competitors' customers rather, will have completely different needs and motivations than your customers. But you should really consider the usefulness of their features, the consistency of their design, the adherence to design guidelines, such as Apple guidelines, material design for Android, accessibility for web, and also the use of trending UI concepts too. You should also think about maybe how your customer's experience would be when switching out to another app, such as Facebook, as part of their user journey then back to yours. The journey should feel it shouldn't feel broken, but it should feel seamless from one app to another. So consider these things when you're doing the design. And actually, so this ties in nicely with this next slide. So first impressions, they do matter. And this is the case with most things, including UI, UX. So the first few moments of any interaction for a user goes a long way in influencing their opinions and decisions. First impressions, they happen pretty fast, especially when the user spends an average of 8 seconds, on a website. And with such a short time frame, they tend to rely on their gut reaction to help guide their opinions of a site or a mobile app. So what does this mean for you? It means actually that you only have a few seconds to get to your user's guts. It might sound impossible, but it's not. And it can be done when you're running your UX implementation correctly. So just remember that the first impression is all about your users. So it's tempting to, resort and go back to design tactics, such as, using shiny big buttons to attract them. But just consider how those elements will make your users feel. So for example, think about the colors and the copy that you have on your homepage or your dashboard. Does it come across as pushy or aggressive? Are you asking your users to commit to something without giving them a chance to get to know you first? These kind of things make your user feel like they're being pushed, and it frustrates them. You need to make them feel like they're the center of attention instead. So to do this, I'd recommend reassessing your design and getting it user tested by actual real customers to see how they feel about it. Okay, now let's move on to the next section, which is discussing what a typical UX process would look like. As you can see here, it actually begins with user research. And this can be carried out using qualitative or quantitative methods. So qualitative being that you're collecting research results from conducting surveys face-to-face with real customers, or even sending out surveys, or doing an observation analysis with customers. And then quantitative is actually analyzing data that you have. It could be competitive data or analytics that you already have in place for the product. So all of these should give you answers to questions like, what are my customers' pain points? What are their motivations? And what do they value? Then once you've figured out all of that, then you can move on to the ideation phase, which is simply coming up with new concepts based on the user research results derived from the previous step. This can be done in the form of a workshop. You can host design thinking workshops, which we'll talk about in the next few slides, or through various exercises such as storyboarding. You then design this concept into the form of a low fidelity prototype, preferably first, then prototype, and of course, test your concept. And having this cautionary step of trial and error before putting together high fidelity designs or implementing the screens fully with your developers will actually save you a lot of time and effort if the concept, of course, fails to achieve the customer goal. So, once a concept or feature is proven to work with a high success rate, then it can be passed on to the development team to start the implementation. However, bear in mind that this should always be an iterative process, hence the arrow, meaning it is not sequential, it's not a one-way thing, but it should be looped between design and test, as we're constantly trying to achieve the optimal solution for our customers in a world where their needs and motivations change so quickly. as well as technology, of course. So, design thinking. It may sound like a buzzword to you that's been flying around the tech industry, and it has been quite a lot recently, but it's actually much more than that. And I'd say that it was a very important concept when designing a product. Design thinking is problem solving in a creative way. And it's often referred to as outside of the box thinking. Because designers, they're attempting to develop new ways of thinking that don't abide by the more common problem solving methods. They've actually developed a number of techniques to fulfill this way of thinking. So what they do is they take the original problem as a suggestion and not as the final statement. It's very important. Then they think broadly about what the real issues underlying this problem statement might really be. So for example, they'll use the 5 whys approach to get at the root causes. Most important of all is that the process is iterative and expansive, just like the process that I showed you in the previous slide. So designers, they resist the temptation to jump immediately to a solution to the stated problem. Instead, what they do is they first spend time determining what the basic fundamental root issue is that needs to be addressed. They don't try to search for a solution until they determine the real problem. And even then, instead of solving that problem, they stop to consider a wide range of potential solutions. All of this will mean that they have fulfilled the process called design thinking efficiently. So I just want to give you an idea of how design thinking can come about. So actually some years ago, an incident occurred where a truck driver tried to pass under a low bridge, but he failed and the truck lodged firmly under the bridge. So the driver was then unable to continue driving through and he wasn't able to reverse out either. So basically he was stuck and it caused a massive traffic problem. And that caused emergency people, engineers, firefighters, truck drivers, all gathering together to try and devise and negotiate various solutions to actually dislodging this truck. So emergency workers were debating whether to dismantle the parts of the truck or chip away at parts of the bridge. Each of them spoke a solution which fitted within his or her respective level of expertise. And then a boy walks by and witnesses the whole debate. He takes a look at the truck, at the bridge, and at the road, and then says, why not just let the air out of the tires? And of course, all the experts were amazed by this. And when the solution was tested, the truck was able to drive free with ease, having suffered only the damage caused by the bridge. So this story, it symbolizes the struggles we face when often the most obvious solutions are the ones that are actually the hardest to come by because of the self-imposed constraints that we work within. Okay, so where does Agile fit into all of this? The Agile methodology, I think, is a must when it comes to customer-centric design, as opposed to waterfall. It accepts that customer requirements may change over time, and it says that your product should be a continuous work in progress, which again ties back into the loop that we were discussing in the last slide. As you can see, the Agile loop, it consists of all the sprint activities and then branches off when the deliverable increment is ready. So you've got your sprint, you've got your product backlog, your sprint planning, then execution, and once you get the thumbs up for sprint review, you're then ready to ship it off. So I see this loop coming into play after your UX concepts have been tested and proven from the design thinking methodology. Then you hand it over to the Agile team for implementation. And of course, once a sprint is done, you then move on to the next and create the next shippable increment until you have your MVP, minimum viable product. So here is what I would imagine the implementation process should look like when incorporating both design thinking and Agile together. So you start off with an inception to understand the project scope. Then you move on to the design thinking phase, whereby you're doing the user research, both qualitative and quantitative, like I discussed before. You're finding out the root problem, and then you're defining your requirements, user stories with the workshops, and ideating new concepts. So once you have some concepts under your belt, you can then start the lean loop, whereby you're continuously prototyping and testing. So a lot of trial and error to find that optimal solution. And once this concept has been proven and meets your KPIs, you can then hand it over to the Agile team and add it to a sprint and actually deliver it. Okay, so let's say you've just started a project with visualizing. How can you actually utilize the visualizer tool, which is our front end tool, by the way, to enable the methodology that we just discussed? So actually, there's a number of ways that you can do this, and I'll go through them now with you. So if you use atomic design when creating your components, then you've got a lot of reusability and consistency in play in your project. You can then set up a design system with your own private marketplace. You can utilize a single code base when creating your components. A single code base being a code base that works for all the different channels, be it Android, iOS, or web. Being consistent with your colors and styles, prototyping as much as possible, and of course, doing the right amount of user testing as well throughout your lifecycle. Okay, so first of all, what is atomic design? Essentially, it's a concept to create design systems in a modular way. So that's opposed to designing or building on a, let's say, page by page basis. You have 5 elements here which make up the atomic design system. We've got atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. So the atoms are small elements or modules in the system, and they're like the building blocks of the application. So examples of these can be buttons. You've got the primary and the secondary button, form elements such as input text fields or drop downs or date pickers, labels, typography, color, and iconography. All of those fit into the atoms category. Molecules, on the other hand, they provide more functionality and are actually groups of atoms bonded together to make up the smallest fundamental units. So for example, having an input text field, which is one atom, and then a button as well. As you can see here, I have the search field, and then I have the button with the search icon on it. That itself would be, let's say, a button atom. Combining them together would create the search form, and that could be a molecule. So an organism is groups of molecules joined together to form a relatively complex section on an interface. So for example, the account list could be combined with the total amount and even the add new account button to form an organism. So these actually demonstrate smaller, simpler components in action, and they serve as distinct patterns that can be used again and again throughout your templates and pages. So moving on to templates, these consist mostly of groups of molecules stitched together to form, let's say, pages. This is where we start to see the design coming together and seeing the layout in action as well. So we can see how breaking our designs into parts helps us establish better design rules and be more conscious of when and why we would want to overwrite certain rules. But essentially a template is a page, but without the content. So just with the let's say you have an accounts list, it wouldn't have the data in there. The final stage is the page. And all templates that incorporate real representative content is called a page. And pages are actually the highest level of fidelity. So they are templates with the final assets, the videos, the photography, and real content all added in, which allows us to review and iterate further on the design if needed. Pages are essential for testing the effectiveness of the underlying design system. So using atomic design when building out your design in Visualizer, it enables you to speed up the development time significantly through reusability and actually create a consistency between your components as well. So the marketplace, some of you might know of it, some of you might not. There exists both a public and a private marketplace. It's essentially a portal of components that can be used across projects and channels, such as iOS, Android, and web. The public marketplace will consist of components that are created by Kony and available for reuse by all the customers. However, the private marketplace is actually a private area specific to one customer, which can be used as a design system, let's say. And as you can see from the diagram on this slide, this is how you would expect to see the marketplace to look like for one customer that is utilizing the atomic design concept when building out their components. You'll notice that they have a number of molecules and atoms presented on their space. For example, the accounts list could be a molecule or it could be an organism, which consists of the plus button, which is an atom. And then the primary button is an atom down on the second row, which will incorporate, let's say, different states, such as pressed, focused, disabled, all in one component. And as the marketplace includes versioning as well, you're able to test out these components and release new versions if anything needs to change after doing user testing on your customers. So also important to note is the benefit of our local platform, which is having a single code base shared across channels. So with this, we have to still consider that all channels will have their own design guidelines, which need to be followed. So for example, iOS, you have your iOS design guidelines, and then material design for Android, and then W3C, accessibility for web, essential. Visualizer allows you to branch off for each channel within your components to enable different looks and feels as well as behaviors. So make sure that you utilize this feature when building out your project. Consistency. I would say that setting up your skins, themes, and fonts, as well as icons, are very important to do at the start of any visualizer project. So if you don't know, a skin is, in other words, the let's say the style specification for a specific widget. For example, a button will have a skin that will consist of a border, color, border width, background color, a font size. Those are the kind of things that you would see within your skin. And the theme is basically a collection of skins. So you could have different themes. You could have one for Android and one for iOS, let's say. So, for example, you could start off your project by defining something. So this is a UI trend that's come into play quite recently, and it's very popular, dark and light modes. This could be done throughout the theming as well. And then you could create different skins for buttons, such as secondary and primary. So this would all live in the skins tab in the left-hand pane in Visualizer. And when you do this, when you utilize all of this at the start of the project, you enable a much quicker development and consistency throughout the project, especially when more than one person is working on it. So I highly recommend doing it. Prototyping. So I've mentioned it before multiple times within my slide deck, but I'll mention it again. Prototyping your design concepts is so important, and it actually comes a long way in implementing efficiently and even bringing your ideas to life. You can use the Quantum app provided on both the App Store for iOS and the Play Store for Android. You can download these and you can use it to build and run your visualizer projects. This can be done either by USB, QR code, or a cloud linked project ID. So when the project has been launched on the app, your user is able to add comments to specific areas and provide feedback throughout the cloud, as you can see from this GIF on the slide. This goes directly to the developer or the designer that's working on the project and visualizing, because it goes through the cloud. So on the example, you see the user is adding a comment to ask, can you change the current account icon color to blue? That will go directly to the developer, and the developer will know that they'll need to change it to blue. So there's a very easy and quick prototyping feature and process included in Visualizer. So this follows through nicely to user testing. Of course, this comes hand in hand with prototyping, and can not only be done with team members and testers, but also with real-life participants. And with a tool like usertesting.com, you're able to send your prototype to candidates with instructions to see how they would navigate your application. So here I have an example of a user test that the Kony product team actually completed against the retail banking product. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear the audio from this, but I will give it a shot. Mary, can you let me know if you hear the audio or not?
I don't hear it, I think.
I don't hear it, yeah.
You don't hear it? Okay.
No.
So, okay, I'll just talk over it. So basically, what's happening here is the participant is first reading the instructions, and the instructions tell her to, one sec. to transfer $100 to John Bailey's checking account. And on playing around with the app, she notices that John Bailey's name is not on the contacts list, and then assumes that she is still able to search for him using the search bar. However, the list should be complete with all available contacts, or at least with pagination. Let me just play it to show you. So the contact would be on a different page, but the participant doesn't notice this. And this is actually really valuable information from the user testing, because it tells the designer that they need to investigate the transfer form and work out whether they've made it clear enough to the user where all of the saved contacts would live. So when building out your project, I really highly encourage you to user test as much as possible to prove your concepts. It really saves you so much time on implementing unsuccessful concepts. And it also allows you to see firsthand how your customers would interact with your product, which is interesting to see. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. So to conclude, there are a number of features that exist within our platform that enable us to carry out design thinking efficiently. And they should be utilized as much as possible. We should also be constantly testing our own platform and products on things like user-friendliness, intuitiveness, and ease of use. So please, all of you, feel free to do this as much as possible. And raise tickets whenever you see something that can be done better, because this showcases our focus on great UX. But yeah, so that's the whole slide deck. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions related to the deck or anything else UX related. I'd be happy to answer them. I'd also actually like to leave you with a few questions for you to think about. And maybe take action on. I think many of these questions have already been asked in the poll, but I thought I'd leave them here anyway. Okay.
Thanks, George. There's one question in the Q&A panel. Do you want me to read it out?
Let me have a look. Could you read it out, because I'm not able to find this.
Yeah, sure. So there's one question from Joffin. He's asking, in an agile project, should there be a design thinking phase for every sprint, or should it be done just once for a project?
I would say that the two would happen at the same time, actually. So the designers would be focusing on doing design thinking on one side, and then you would have the Agile team working on the sprints. So side by side. And whenever the designers come up with a new concept within design thinking, they then hand it over to the Agile team to put into one of their sprints. And that happens continuously.
All right, thank you. There's one more from Philip. He's asking, can you set a default primary color on Kony Visualizer and change that instead of creating a whole new theme?
A default primary color on Kony Visualizer. Now, I know that this is definitely a need, and many people have requested this. I don't think we have it available on Kony Visualizer at the moment, unfortunately. So you aren't able to set variables for different colors and then refer back to them. Unfortunately, the only way to do this at the moment is to set your colors within skins, and then reuse those skins whenever you use a new widget. But I do agree that this would definitely be something that would come in handy when implementing a project on Visualizer. So I will try to push this across, actually, to the product team.
All right. Thanks, Rosh, for your time and session today. It was great indeed. And I'm sure it was useful to everyone who has joined us today. To all the attendees, as I mentioned earlier, this webinar recording will be available on Basecamp. And you can share it later with your friends, colleagues, in case they are not able to attend it today. If you have questions, we are still available over here for a few minutes. Feel free to use the Q&A panel and ask questions. Um, there's one more from Fernando. He says, do you know which will be the roadmap of Kony with Temenos T24?
I wish I knew this, Fernando. I don't think anyone knows what the roadmap for Kony with Temenos will be in the future. I think they're still working it out at the moment. So I guess let's wait and see.
Yeah, and there's one more from Jofin. He's asking, as we work with multiple customers, clients, is it really meaningful in a design system of our own? Is it really meaningful to have a design system of our own, since every customer will have their own branding and looks?
I think it would definitely be meaningful to have our own design system, actually, because that could help massively when the client, let's say, takes one of our accelerators, such as retail banking or SME banking, and puts that into place. If they are able to use a design system, then it would be much easier to plug in the different colors and fonts from their branding and styling. And it will speed up the implementation significantly. So I think it's definitely meaningful to have our own design system.
And I think there's one last from Alan. He says, your consistency slide showed look consistency, but nothing about feel consistency.
Okay. So what's the question, Alan?
Yeah, I'm not very sure about the question, Alan. If you have if you have a detail to share, please do that. We are still here for a couple more minutes. And in case this is the first time you're attending this webinar, let me share my slide and show a few things. Rosh, if you can stop sharing and give it
Yeah,
back to me,
sure.
I would like to share a few slides. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, so as you see this one, we have a next webinar on November 19th, how to customize applications with themes and skins. If this is the first time for you to attend this webinar, let me just explain again. You can go to events page on Basecamp and register for the webinar. And for this webinar, the recording will be available again on the events page so that you can just take a look again. And we have Facebook group where we talk about webinars, we talk about different stuff. So if you want to join the Facebook group, this is the link. You can go to Facebook groups, Kony Dev community, search for it, and you'll find it with the same banner that you see on top. We also have a YouTube channel where we post webinar recordings again. So you have one more place to see the webinar. And then you can follow us on Twitter with the hashtag Kony Basecamp. We post a lot of news about Basecamp and whatever events we do with the community. And then the recording, as I said, this is the link, the third point you see, basecamp.kony.com/s/events, where you see past webinars plus the recent ones, and then you can access the recording from this page. If you have any topic in mind you want to share, please do that. Email us to on basecamp@kony.com, and we would definitely want to hear from you and get more webinars, get more people to do the webinars on your favorite topics. So feel free to email us on basecamp@kony.com. That's it from my end. Thank you once again for joining the session today. We are still here. I'm going to mute myself and everybody else, but if you have questions, make sure you post it in the Q&A panel, and within a couple of minutes, we'll close the session. Thank you once again, and thanks, Rosh, for doing the session
Wait,
today.
Raz, there's one more question. How do you cater for accessibility requirements, for example, WCAG 2.0 AA? Are these features or tools available in Kony to help build forms that are accessible?
Hi. So actually, there are a number of features available on Visualizer that allow you to implement your web application and make it accessible. I can't pinpoint them right now, but if you turn on the accessibility feature within your Visualizer tool, then it should show all of the accessibility related fields that you can fill in. Things like ARIA labels, and things like localization as well, for example. But a bunch of things will show up once you enable that accessibility feature on your Visualizer tool. But of course, outside of Visualizer, there are many other tools that you can use to check accessibility. Things like contrast checkers. There are loads of online tools where you can run your application through to see if there are any things missing. Like, for example, your header tags, are they in the right order? Do you have your ARIA labels in place? Yeah, do all of your input fields have a label? Those kind of things it will look for.
Okay, I think that's finally it. Thank you so much.